Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome back to day 55 of our Great Bible Truth series. We are going to be looking at 2 Kings 5, 1 through 27. A leper is healed. So let's get into our story. We see the king of Syria has a commander by the name of Naaman. Now, Naaman is a good general, it says. He won many victories for the Syrian king. And so he likes this commander. Unfortunately, he catches leprosy, which is a skin disease which eats away your skin, and it's a slow, painful, ultimately death because you just rot away. And so the king is saddened by this, but a Israeli girl who had actually been kidnapped by these Syrian raiders, okay, they take this girl and take her back to Naaman's wife, and she basically, the Israeli girl tells them about this prophet who was in Samaria, and basically says, hey, if you go to this prophet, he'll heal you, right? So the king catches wind of this. They go and tell the king this. And basically the king says, okay, there's a prophet that can heal this guy. Then I'm going to write the king of Israel a letter and send him a letter. And he takes 750 pounds of silver with that letter, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 pairs of clothes, which is kind of a funny part of the story to me. He's taking, the equivalent of that time of millions and millions, if not billions of dollars. I mean, that's even right now, 150 pounds of gold would, just be a vast amount of money. And so even back then, even more, right? Because of inflation. But along with this is 10 pairs of clothes, which probably wouldn't be as valuable, but hey, the need for some nice clothing is always something that people have looked for, especially in a time when you just can't go to the store and buy it, right? So it's a meaningful gift. Here's wealth to buy things, and also here's some really good threads to wear, so to speak. So, but he writes this letter, takes these gifts because he wants his commander here. He wants to offer the best of the best to have this guy, right? So it's kind of like this guy is worth millions of dollars to me because of his skills as a commander. So it's worth whatever it is if it's going to win you a battle, right? Especially because one loss could lose your whole kingdom. So he's willing just to lay it all on the line. The king of Israel, however, kind of reads the letter and gets mad. And he's like, what? Am I God that I can heal people's leprosy? Why is this guy sending me a letter and gifts? This must be a trap. This must be a trick, right, to draw me into war and to say, hey, I gave you all this money and you couldn't heal him of leprosy, and so I'm going to war with you now. So the king rips his clothes as a sign of blasphemy, and he's angry. But the prophet Elisha hears of this and says, send them to me. Okay, so the king of Israel here, it appears, has less faith in his own prophet than the king of Syria. Ironic, but, as Jesus says, only in his hometown is a prophet without honor. But the king thinks it's a trap. It's not a trap. He really wants his commander healed. And so Naaman goes and sees Elijah. And Elijah comes out and basically tells him to go and wash in the river 7 times to be healed of his leprosy. Now, Naaman gets upset. And first off, he gets upset. And then he wants, something more. What? Go wash in the Jordan River 7 times? Like, isn't there a special prayer or potion or something you do? Like, I could have just went down and washed in the Jordan. And he even says he expected the prophet to kind of wave his hand, right? He has this spiritual act that's going to heal him. And then says, if it was just a matter of washing 7 times, there's better rivers in Syria I could have washed in. Wouldn't those have cleansed me more than the Jordan? So he gets angry. He literally gets enraged and leaves upset. But then, fortunately for him, one of the men with him say, what if he had asked you to do something hard? Wouldn't you have done it? If he told you to go hike to the highest mountain and bring back the snow-capped, icicles of Mount so-and-so, you would have done it, right? If that would have healed you of your leprosy. He's asking you to do something simple, so why not do it? So he does it, and he's healed. Goes back, offers the prophet Elisha all of this money, and Elisha says, no, I don't want the money. We did this as a sign that God is a true God. And Naaman basically says, your God is the true God. Basically, forgive me of my idolatry. I will no longer worship the false gods and the idols, but I will worship Yahweh, the true God. It's a good story up until that point. Unfortunately, Elisha's servant, a guy by the name of Ghazi, we could call this the greed of Ghazi, says, because Elisha doesn't take any of the money or any of the clothes. He goes away. And he's about a half mile back into his travel when Ghazi says, why should I let this guy go? He has all this stuff. Maybe we should just take a little bit. So he goes and he asks for about 75 pounds of the silver. Remember, he had 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 pairs of clothes. So Gehazi is just trying to take a little bit for himself. He says, well, just give me 75 pounds of the silver, and doesn't ask for any of the gold, and asks for 2 pairs of clothing, because he tells Naaman that 2 prophets showed up right as he was leaving. And even though Elisha said, we don't need this, you know what? These 2 prophets showed up after all, and so they could probably use a little bit. That's Gehazi's story. It's a believable story. Naaman says, sure, I brought way more to give you. That's all you need. Take it. You probably felt great. Thank you for taking some gifts. Thank you for that I can give back to you. But Elisha didn't want him to give back because he didn't want him to think he could pay God. He got Naaman to where he wanted to get him, which was by faith. He believed in the act of God to heal him. And even though he doubted, his servant talked him into trying it. And so he acted out in faith, and he indeed was healed. He felt convicted of his sin. He says, there is no other God this strong. I'm done worshiping false gods. I'm going to worship the true God. But Gehazi is thinking of his own self and greed. And it comes back to Elisha. And Elisha says, basically, he is astonished that he did this, and says that the leprosy which left Naaman will now be upon you and your offspring, and pronounces the curse of leprosy to him for ultimately his greed. Rather, he's supposed to be an understudy of Elisha, a man of God, right? A prophet of God. He's supposed to be following in godly ways, and yet Naaman, the Syrian, the foreigner, it responds more godly to this miracle by saying, I'm going to worship the true God and flee from idolatry, where Gehazi is saying, let me get something monetarily out of it. All right, let's look at the questions now. Number 1 is, who was Naaman? Where did he live, and what did he do? I think we answered that one. So let's go to number 2. Explain how God used the servant girl from Israel and later Naaman's own servant to help bring about Naaman's healing. I think we answered that one pretty well too, but God used both the servant girl and the servant to kind of speak wisdom to those who are above them. Okay, I think that would be the simplest way to say that. And had the servant girl not shared what she knew, what she had heard, and the servant himself had not talked to Naaman, his superior, this wouldn't have been a good story for Naaman. This wouldn't have turned out the same way. Number 3, what was Naaman's response to his healing? And what promise did he make to Elisha? I think we answered this one as well. His response to the healing was he was repentant, thankful, grateful to God, promised to turn from idolatry. Yeah. 4, what was Gehazi's problem and what happened to him as a result of his greed? I think we kind of answered that one too, right? He had greed. That was his problem, and he inherited the leprosy because of his greed. That was a curse upon him for looking to money rather than to God, as Elijah had pointed him. 5, do you see how God can use anyone, even a lowly servant girl, to tell others about their faith in God? And yes, I do. And I hope you do too, because I think each of us need to understand whether we're like that servant girl who was, think of it, she was kidnapped and taken to Syria, and yet she shared about the prophet of God who could bring about healing. This story doesn't go this direction apart from her. So the other servant as well played a part, but really, this girl was a catalyst of sharing the Lord. And sometimes we forget that we can be used, right? We might not be the prophet or the agent of change, but she pointed people to the prophet. She pointed people to God. And so we can do the same thing. Say a verse that's spoken in our life, point them to the scripture, maybe a sermon, and say, hey, this is a sermon that stuck out well with me. Maybe a story. This story really ministered to me. Hey, come to church with me. This is somewhere that's ministered to me. We can all, like this girl, point people to things that we know that have impacted us. Even if you're not able to bring that, miracle about yourself, you can point people to God in some way, shape, or form. So how can we all do that this week? How can we all do that the rest of our lives? How can we be those type of people that point people to Christ? Let us think on that, and we'll see you tomorrow.